Hi everybody, this is Eagles and Pigeons, and yeah, so one of the things I'd like to get to, this is a short one, is about a lot of, for example, I just finished work about 2 months ago. I quit as the economic development officer for my community, so which has been really good. I've gone more the entrepreneurship route and doing a lot of consulting based on my background. And what I like on this channel is where I want to talk about things about being on reserve and the actual realities of it. You know, some of us are dealing with, different reserves have different issues. And so one of the things I wanted to get into is, for example, why, again, I've spoken to this in the past on Eagles and Pigeons. It's been such a long time since I've actually promoted the channel or done anything. So one of the things I'd like to get into is for example, if you're working for a corrupt band and kind of surviving that, especially because there's a thing what I call is on-reserve gaslighting. And it's kind of an issue where they do things to erode your sense of morality. And I've seen this happen in different Native organizations and different even bands, where they erode your sense of self and your sense of self-worth by constantly downing you. And it's a very subtle process. For me, I had worked for the band a long time and worked a lot before within Native organizations, so I understood the whole lateral violence thing. But this is the gaslighting that comes with the lateral violence aspect, and this is why it's super important to understand when this is going on. For example, if you're qualified and you have sound judgments and sound decisions based on topics, they'll belittle it. For me, I was working for Kitagan Zibi, which is an extremely corrupt band, hoping because there was a young chief that got in that system would change, but it never changes. It's not to be cocky, it's just the way it is. But going back to it is, with this gaslighting, is they'll do these subtle things to doubt you or deny you or deny validation, or for example, they'll nitpick, for example, your work instead of the actual body of information. They'll nitpick things, or they'll do anything to discredit you, especially if you keep things above board. For example, in my community, the problem is financial accountability. Personally, I tend to tell people to avoid Native bands, to work for them altogether. Again, or work for them on a contract basis where you don't have to keep silent on things. For me, I worked for the band as economic development officer through the pandemic because of just lack of options, and I wanted my son to know what it is on reserve. But I've turned more to the entrepreneurship side of things. So one of the things is the gaslighting is they'll constantly undermine you, constantly belittle you, and they'll constantly turn down your projects, even if it benefits them long term. And for example, again, and then how the cycle just gets worse and worse is they start actually they'll start overriding you and doing these like backroom deals. And then what they'll do is they'll try and pin it on you as economic development officer. For example, like in my case, they were doing this dam partnership with a dam. I had worked out this thing for a pilot school for aviation to start with the Chamber of Commerce in the neighboring non-native town, so we could have a structure. But what I did is I did not provide. Where you got to start doing is you don't provide the full information and you don't provide the things you have to bring to the table. So the project naturally collapses without you, especially if it's yours and they want the credit for it. In my case with the pilot school is I had contacts from a neighboring Native nation that would have made it feasible, but they didn't see that. This one director had a huge complex for power. She's always trying to, she had it out for me because she's in with this one counselor who I had disagreements with because he wanted to manipulate a budget that I was working on as a contract employee. Because this guy owns multiple businesses. He's a lawyer. He works with the prosecution in town, so he has a lot of power in the community, and he's on council. So it's always this corrupt interplay. There's also the, again, another factor is, they'll undermine that. So what ended up happening, though, is with the story with the pilot school, and I found this out recently, is from one of the partners, is it fell apart because this director, who was the rubber stamp for this one counselor to make it look like everything was above board, what ended up happening is she ended up putting her husband, who's a drug addict, and her family members and close friends, and these people would not pass a physical. When I was working, I was intending this for the 18 to 25-year-old who, is young, physically fit, and trying to look for a career. But she just did it her group of friends because the band could only put forth 5 students for the pilot school, and so she had her husband, who's pushing 60, who's been a drug addict for a long time, her daughter, who's also very questionable. And so again, it's always this thing with the on-reserve gaslighting, is what they do is so they undermined it, said, I didn't have all the information. They went around saying around the community that I had portrayed a negative light when I had given the numbers, and I was just giving facts about the command structure of the way the band works, and I wasn't talking about anything political, although I'm saying a little more than I did here. I gave nothing like political. I was just saying like how it's basically a top-down structure, not getting into it. But so what they do is they try and erode you, and then they erode your credibility, and so you look incompetent around the community. For myself, is I didn't put my eggs in one basket, so I make enough off consultation, off different contracts. I never have one stream of income. That's just my personal motto, because it's extremely dangerous, because I've seen people fall into the trap of becoming dependent on the band employment. And the minute you start pushing through or you compromise on anything with the band council, especially with a lot of the corruption that goes on, especially in my band in Kitigan Zibi, is that the minute they do that, they leverage it against you. And like I've seen this happen time and time again. For example, this director who was given the go-ahead, it all started when she started as the new director. She wasn't approving my trainings, my requests to go to conferences, all pertaining to my job, even if they were necessary, with like necessary partners. She was doing everything to stonewall that. And the other thing is she was also, but the flip side of that coin is how they got her is, for example, she had been there, and this is just reserve talk, but she had been there as because she lost her job in the city, and because her son got caught with narcotics trafficking. So that's the natural thing is in where I'm from, is people who come back to the reserve sometimes come back to the reserve because they're trying to hide from something. So she was very close with this one counselor who's on the he's not on the prosecution, but he works a lot with the prosecution. He's a lawyer. He does the taxes for the community. He owns businesses. And so he's very powerful in that regard. So I'm not saying his name for my own personal safety, or I'm not saying any names, but it's one of those things where it's, for example, going back to this director, is her son was later, after the whole narcotics thing, he was involved in a very well publicized murder, and so then suddenly suddenly everything's getting passed through for her. There's all these things, and her son's working for the band. It doesn't seem like he's getting into trouble. So again, but that's how they got her, is she passes everything. And it's a lot more complicated than just this. But again, this is why I discourage anybody. Even just today, I tried getting a micro-CEDO loan, which is a loan that we're entitled to. And it was like all these technicalities and all this stuff. She was stonewalling, so I just said, forget it. I don't need it. And at the end of the day, I'm happy because I don't need their dirty money.